Welcome to Lazarus Church, where we seek to connect with Jesus, His church, and His kingdom calling. More information can be found at lazaruschurch.com.
We are continuing our sermon series on starting new, and the place we're going to go to start off is Psalm 13. Let me read you just a little bit of it. It starts out this way. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. Now today we're catching up with Joseph in prison. And even though those words from Psalm 13 were penned years after Joseph was in prison, they capture the emotion that Joseph must have been experiencing as he was sitting in the prison cell, languishing, wondering what was going to be going on. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? Have you been in that place? Have you felt forgotten by God? Because if so, today's message is for you. We're continuing our sermon series on starting new, how God helps us in the new adventures to which He calls us. And as we are diving into this, we've been looking at the story of Joseph as kind of our guiding path for this sermon series. We're looking at kind of four scenes from the life of Joseph. Really, they're times of transition when he goes from something that was his normal to something new. And we're talking about what that new thing looked like, how he navigated that with God's help. The first week when we dove into this, we talked about how Joseph went from being the privileged favorite son of his father Jacob, how everybody knew he was the favorite son of Jacob, and how that caused some jealousy with his brothers, how he actually didn't help the situation at all, and that resulted in his brothers being so angry at him, so hateful of him, that they sold him into slavery, and that's how he ended up in Egypt, serving in the household of a man named Potiphar. And yet even in that, God was with him. God was with Joseph and helped everything that he did to be successful. And so it wasn't long before Potiphar had Joseph basically in charge of everything. If you've got a guy who's faithful at his task, who's doing good things and is successful at it, and you're benefiting from the success, of course you give that guy some more responsibility. And so Joseph ends up not only being the personal attendant of Potiphar, he also ends up in charge of the household, in charge of the business endeavors of the household, any of the crops that were going on. He was in charge of that too. He's kind of second in command over the house of Potiphar. And yet he wasn't to remain in that position all during his time in Egypt. There's a turn in the story where things change yet again. We talked last week about Potiphar's wife, how she took notice of Joseph and how that led to some very bad things for Joseph. When he refused her advances, she decided to punish him, and that ended up with a false accusation that landed him in prison, the prison where Pharaoh kept his prisoners. This could be an important detail for what we're talking about today. Joseph ends up in prison, and we left him there last week. We talked about how when you hit rock bottom, you find out that Jesus is the rock at the bottom, that the Lord was with Joseph, even in the midst of that situation. It was kind of like the second verse, same as the first. The jailer recognizes that Joseph is faithful, and so he starts giving him some responsibility that turns into him being in charge of some of the other prisoners, taking care of them. And the jailer really doesn't have anything to worry about because Joseph is so good and faithful at his job because God is with him. This is where we pick up with Joseph today. Now, our reading talks about how Joseph gets out of prison, but we're going to get there. We've got to have a little bit of a lead up to that. Talk about what were the events that led to Joseph getting out of prison and having an audience with Pharaoh. That's a pretty big deal. Let's remember some of the timeline here too. Joseph, when he's taken into Egypt, is 17 years old. So imagine the 17-year-olds that you know. Imagine the stuff that they kind of do. Some of that kind of youthful thinking you have, nothing to worry about, thinking you could take on the world and all of its challenges. Some of that has been smoothed out of Joseph through the challenges that he has faced. He doesn't end up reconciling with his family, which is where the story is going at the end of it, until he's 37 years old. So we've got a 20-year period where Joseph is in Egypt. He spends some of that time in Potiphar's house serving. He spends some of that time in the prison. And we aren't sure exactly how much time that is, but from some further details later in the story, we think that Joseph is probably in his mid to late 20s at this point. Mid to late 20s, he's serving in the prison. He's been there for some time. He's in charge of several of the prisoners, taking care of them, providing for them, making sure they have what they need. And it just so happens that there are two prisoners of Pharaoh that end up under Joseph's care. Two guys who end up there, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Let me advance real quick here through some of our pictures. There's Joseph. This is, by the way, from the Jesus Storybook Bible. If you don't already have this resource in your house, we give those away to families. We'd love for you guys to be equipped with this, especially if you have littles in the house that you're trying to teach about Jesus. There's a fantastic resource. If you haven't ever really done a deep dive into the Bible, it's actually a great resource for adults because it's a super accessible way to get to know a great overview of the scriptures. If that would be helpful for you, grab them. We've got them at the welcome table. There's Joseph. There's Joseph on his way to prison. This is a little painting of what's happening in the prison as Joseph engages with the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So let's talk real quickly about their jobs. Chief cupbearer would actually be a pretty sweet gig if you think about it. Your job is that you taste the wine and you present the very best wine to Pharaoh. You make sure that he has what he needs and only the best touches Pharaoh's lips. Lots of perks. You get to enjoy the best wine, the really, really good, top shelf stuff, right? And so he gets to do that. The one downside of the cupbearer's job would be that if somebody's trying to assassinate the king and they're trying to poison him, the cupbearer is the guy who goes down first. That's, he's kind of the stopgap to make sure that nobody can poison Pharaoh. So, one downside to the job, lots of perks, but, your life is always on the line. Oh, well, that's the way it goes. Just personally, I think I would probably enjoy that job more than the chief baker, because then you always got to be creating stuff and making stuff, but both of them are serving Pharaoh, both of them are doing their job, and Pharaoh is the guy who ultimately is the one that they are serving. Now, we're not told exactly what they did to offend Pharaoh. We're just told that they offended him in some way. Not told how. Maybe the chief cupbearer tried to pass off some $2 chuck to Pharaoh instead of the good stuff. We don't really know. Maybe the chief baker decided he needed to try some low-carb recipes and Pharaoh wasn't having it. Not really told exactly what happens, but somehow they offend Pharaoh, and the offense is so great that Pharaoh throws them in prison. And they're there in prison for some time under the care of Joseph. Joseph comes into their cell block one morning, and he notices that their faces are downcast, is what the text says. They're looking down. They've got this kind of droopy heaviness to them. And so Joseph asks them, what's going on? They say, well, we've both had dreams last night, and we don't have anyone to interpret them for us. So two quick things here. One, these dreams must have been something different than the crazy dreams that you and I have sometimes where things kind of don't make sense. There was something about these dreams that clued them in that this was some sort of vision type thing, future telling type thing that needed that was significant in some way. The other thing that this tells us is that one of the perks of being in Pharaoh's personal attendance, chief cupbearer, chief baker, was that you also had access to some of the other people who served Pharaoh, such as the wise men, the dream interpreters of Pharaoh. So you could ask your colleague, hey, I had this crazy dream last night. What does this mean? And they could help you out with that interpretation. There's no one to interpret this dream for them in the prison, though. And then Joseph speaks up. This is what Joseph says. He says, don't dream interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams. Where do the interpretations come from? They come from God. Joseph, who's had some pretty significant dreams in the story so far. Remember the sheaves that bow down to him, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bow down to him. He knows those things are significant. He puts two and two together that one day his family's going to bow down to him. He's had some significant dreams. Don't dream interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. And so they do. And the dreams are really fascinating. They have the number 3 involved in both of them. The chief cupbearer dreams that there's a vine that grows up and it sprouts 3 branches. And he takes Pharaoh's cup and he squeezes the grapes from that vine into the cup. And he puts the cup of Pharaoh into Pharaoh's hand. And then he wakes up. And Joseph says, well, the 3 branches of the vine represent 3 days. In 3 days' time, Pharaoh is going to lift up your head and restore you to your position. Lift up your head in this sense, this kind of Hebrew idiomatic phrase of put you back into your position. Lift up your head, restore you to your position is what he's getting at here. So that's the interpretation that he gives to the cupbearer. And at that point, he also speaks up to the cupbearer and says, when that happens, remember me. Remember, here I am, falsely accused in prison. I didn't do the things that I was accused of. I really shouldn't be here. Plead my case before Pharaoh. He's cashing in his favor here to say, please bring this up to Pharaoh because I'm not supposed to be here. Now, the chief baker has been listening to this dream interpretation. Here's is a favorable one, and he thinks to himself, okay, well, here we go. Let me tell you my dream now. His dream is that he has 3 baskets full of bread, baked goods that he's made for Pharaoh. And he's got those 3 baskets kind of balanced up on his head. He's carrying those. And as he's going along, the birds keep coming down, and they're pecking at the bread, and they're eating the bread that he's prepared for Pharaoh. What's it mean, Joseph? And Joseph says, well, the 3 baskets also represent 3 days. In 3 days, your head is going to be lifted up, and this is a very interesting phrase, whereas in the past the Hebrew was kind of the idiomatic, we're lifting up your head in like a restorative sense. In this sense, they do the play on words, where it's actually a literal interpretation. Your head will be lifted up from your body, and you will be executed, and the scavenger birds will feed upon your body. And that's how the dream interpretation ends. Joseph just kind of lays it out there. Thanks a lot, Joseph. Appreciate the graphic nature of this. Notice he doesn't manage to ask the chief baker, hey, and when that happens, remember me. Doesn't say that at all. Only the cupbearer. And don't you imagine that for the next 3 days, these 2 guys were wanting very different things. The chief cupbearer is over here. He's probably thinking, oh man, I really, really hope this interpretation comes true. And the baker over here is thinking to himself, wow, I really, really hope that Joseph is full of baloney and doesn't know what he was talking about. But in 3 days, it happens just as Joseph said. It's Pharaoh's birthday. He calls for the chief cupbearer, restores him to his position, calls for the chief baker, and everything that Joseph said about him happens just as Joseph said. And then there's this line. It's actually the last line of chapter 40. The story's been going really good so far. You're kind of thinking, okay, maybe something good is about to happen. And then all those hopes just get dashed. This is the verse that chapter 40 ends with. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Ouch. You imagine what that was like for Joseph? We're told that this stretches on for some time. Maybe the first day when it happens, he's thinking to himself, okay, cupbearer, he's getting back into his position. You can't make a favor on like the first day, ask for a favor the first day that you're back in your new job. So second day though, maybe this is going to be the day when I finally have my freedom. It doesn't happen that day. Next day, maybe this is going to be the day when I'm finally vindicated, when people know that I didn't do the things that I was accused of. It doesn't happen. And days pass into weeks, which pass into months. Turns out it's 2 years that Joseph ends up in prison, still imprisoned after these events take place. There's a guy who wrote a book. His name is R.T. Kendall. The book is called God Meant It for Good. And in it, he kind of explores the story of Joseph. And one of the things he says about Joseph in this particular moment is that Joseph wasn't ready for the next thing that God has in store for him. It's an interesting perspective. He thinks that Joseph actually had too much control that he wanted to exert over his life and his situation. That the fact that he asked the cupbearer to step in for him, that he asked for a favor, that's evidence of Joseph trying to kind of control the situation and take life on his own terms. That maybe the reason why the cupbearer forgets, maybe the reason why God allows that to happen is so that Joseph can have those last bits of that self-control, that self-preservation kind of worked out of him, so he's prepared for what God has next. Now, the Bible doesn't say that directly, but I think that's a fascinating perspective to look at in that story. It's 2 years later, and we're told that somebody else has a dream. And it's Pharaoh. And in Pharaoh's dream, a little illustration from the Jesus Storybook Bible, in Pharaoh's dream, he dreams that there are 7 fat, plump, healthy-looking cows that come out of the Nile and they're grazing among the reeds. And then there are 7 skinny, sickly-looking cows that come out of the Nile and start up by the healthy-looking cows. And the sickly cows eat the healthy cows, yet they don't look any less skinny or sickly. And then Pharaoh wakes up. Then he has a second dream. And in this dream, he dreams that there's a grain sprout that comes up, and it sprouts these 7 heads of grain. They're plump, they're healthy, they look great, exactly the kind of crop a farmer would want. And then there's another shoot that sprouts up next to that first shoot that has 7 sprouts of grain on it, and those heads of grain look like they were scorched from a hot east wind. And those unhealthy grains eat up the healthy grains, but they don't look any better for it. And he wakes up a second time. We're told that in the morning, Pharaoh was troubled by his dreams, calls together all of the dream interpreters, all the wise men, and they cannot figure out what this thing means. Now, when you actually hear the interpretation of the dream, you look back on it and you say, well, yeah, duh, surely they should have known that. Remember what Joseph said to the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Don't dream interpretations belong to God. I think probably God is at work here, preventing the dream interpreters, the wise men, from being able to figure out what's going on, because this is the moment God has prepared Joseph for. This is the moment when the cupbearer remembers, Joseph, I forgot all about Joseph. And so he goes to the Pharaoh and he starts this speech off. Today I remember my sins, O Pharaoh, which is basically kind of a nice way of saying, hey boss, you remember that thing I really don't want to bring up to your attention again, but it happened? Yeah, we're going to talk about that thing. I remember there was this thing, I offended you in some way. By the way, I'm super sorry. I apologize again. Super thankful for you restoring me to my position here. But while I was in prison, I met this guy. He's a Hebrew. His name is Joseph, and he interpreted the dream that I had, that I would be restored to serving you, and exactly what he interpreted is exactly what happened. Pharaoh says, call for Joseph. So they go to the prison, they bring Joseph out, they shave him, they put clean clothes on him. This is what our reading was today, and they present him before Pharaoh. And as they present him before Pharaoh, Pharaoh says, I've heard that you can interpret dreams. This is what Joseph says. They shaved him, changed his clothes. He went into Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream. No one can interpret it, but I've heard it said about you that you can hear a dream and interpret it. I am not able to. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Do you notice the subtle difference between what Joseph said to the cupbearer and the baker and what he said to Pharaoh? Dream interpretations belong to God. Give them to me. Let me do my thing. Over with Pharaoh, I cannot. But God can. This is the turn that R.T. Kendall is talking about. He interprets the dream for Pharaoh, that the number 7 is significant in this. And since it's 2 dreams that involve the number 7, it's a sure thing that God is going to be doing this. He tells Pharaoh that the 7 cows who are healthy and the 7 heads of grain that look really healthy are 7 healthy years, 7 prosperous years that the land is going to have. It's going to produce even more than what is needed. But then after those 7 years of plenty, there's going to come 7 years of famine. And the 7 years of famine are going to be so intense that the healthy years are going to be entirely forgotten. And everybody's going to be in need. And then Joseph, it's almost like he can't help himself. He continues on. And so he gives some advice to Pharaoh. While he's got this audience with Pharaoh, this is what he says. So now, let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man. Set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this. Let him appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the harvest of the land, 20% during the years of plenty, the years of abundance. Let them gather all the excess food during these good years that are coming. Under Pharaoh's authority, store the grain in the cities so they may preserve it as food. The food will be a reserve for the land during the 7 years of famine that will take place in the land of Egypt. Then the country will not be wiped out by famine. This proposal pleased Pharaoh. Let's just pause right there. Here you have a guy who is not from Egypt, who was literally in prison like minutes before this. And he makes a proposal to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like, you know what? That's a good idea. This has to be God's hand working here. This would not happen under like normal circumstances. God is the one orchestrating this, making this happen. This pleased Pharaoh and all his servants, and he said to them, can we find anyone like this man who has God's Spirit in him? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there's no one as discerning and wise as you are. You'll be over my house, and all my people will obey your commands. Only I as king will be greater than you. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, see, I am placing you over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him with fine linen and garments, and placed a gold chain around his neck. He had Joseph ride in his second chariot, and servants called out before him, make way. So he placed him over all the land of Egypt. Now, this might sound like a far-fetched story. Like at this point, everything that we've been tracking with so far, the details, like you could kind of track and say, okay, this is sort of realistic. This sounds a little bit like unrealistic. We're almost taking that leap into the fantastic at this point. Except that the Bible continues on with some details that would have to happen for this story to make sense. We're told that Joseph is given a new name, which would be a must, that he has to adopt the Egyptian customs, that he gets an Egyptian wife from a very prominent religious family, that he raises his kids, and when his kids are born, he gives them names that are significant too. All the things that Pharaoh would have to do to make sure that this guy that he's decided is somebody he wants to appoint, to make sure that this guy actually is accepted by the people that he's going to be over, also take place. So even though it seems like this is something, a pretty big deal, it's almost fantastic in its effect, you see the details here that let us know this is really something that happened, something that truly happened because the details make sense. Joseph ends up over the whole land of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh, in charge of this program that is going to preserve the land of Egypt. And this is the place where we're going to pause and leave Joseph. So I want to draw some applications from the story so far for us. We're going to catch up with Joseph next week, catching the kind of end of the story, how he gets reconciled back to his family. So we'll just kind of leave that cliffhanger right there. But I want to talk about what it looks like for us, what it means for us that God was with Joseph and the things that God did through Joseph. From the prison to before Pharaoh. First thing that it means for us. Application for our lives, looking at the story of Joseph. Let go and let God. Now, R.T. Kendall makes a pretty convincing case that Joseph had a lot of controlling tendencies, that he was trying to manipulate the situation with the cupbearer for his advantage. And I don't know if that's true. The Bible doesn't directly say that, and so it's a little bit of conjecture at this point, but I do know this, that that's definitely my tendency. That when I'm put in a situation where things are not so great and I've got only so many cards to play, I'm going to be pretty strategic in how I play those cards because I want things to work for my advantage. That's human nature. This is all of us. All of us want, in some sense, to be able to control the outcome of the things around us. Some of us struggle with that more than others. For every one of us, though, we need to trust that God knows better. To borrow from Forrest Frank, your ways are better. God's ways are always better. That God is the one who can provide for his people. That God is the one who is going to take care of his people. And he's going to take care of us too. R.T. Kendall in his book has this interesting line. He proposes a question and just kind of leaves it there hanging. And the question is this: if we want something and we don't have it, and it seems like we can't have it, could it be that God is withholding that thing from us? Maybe it's not circumstances, maybe it's not situation, maybe it's the hand of God in some sense. Maybe God has something better in store. We definitely see that in the story of Joseph. The way it plays out is the salvation of lives. People are saved. Their lives are preserved because God puts Joseph in the right place at the right time after 2 years of imprisonment and being forgotten there after his conversation with the cupbearer. To be at the right place at the right time, to be called out of the prison before Pharaoh's court, to be able to help the nation of Egypt survive. And by that also, the surrounding nations, including the place where his family is still living. Let go and let God. Maybe the thing that's going on is actually God working good for something better. Second thing we can learn from Joseph is faithfulness in small things leads to faithfulness in bigger things. Jesus told a parable about this. Somebody was entrusted with a certain amount of resources to use well. They invested it well, and when the master returns, he decides to put them in charge of many more things. This is just basic understanding of the way that God wove the world to work. It works this way. When you're faithful in small things, as preparation for the big things. Don't despise small beginnings, is what Scripture says. Maybe that thing that you're supposed to be faithful with right now that feels insignificant is actually preparation for something else that God's going to use for his glory in some way. And the third thing that this kind of story of Joseph draws our attention to, our application, is that God is working in the waiting. God is working in the waiting. When Joseph is in prison, there's character work being done on him. God is working on him, preparing him for what's next. Let me propose to you that as you are waiting, in whatever situation in which you find yourself, maybe God is doing something, doing some sort of work in you that maybe is going to benefit you in some way. Maybe it's going to benefit somebody else who is watching how you're going through that situation. Maybe there's something going on where God is going to reveal on the last day when we're before him and asking all of our questions, hey, that thing that you had that was going on that you felt like was taking forever, here's why this was going on. God has his reasons. Can we trust him in that? Think of the life and ministry of Jesus. Jesus did a fair amount of waiting. He was on earth for 30 years before beginning his ministry. What was going on during that time? Preparation for what was next. Preparation for those 3 years of ministry that would change the world. Preparation for the gift of salvation that he gives to us freely by his sacrificial death for us on the cross. God works in the waiting. And so if you are waiting and when you are waiting, let me draw your attention back to Psalm 13, the rest of Psalm 13. I'm going to read it all the way through this time. All 6 verses say this: How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemy say I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. Listen to these last 2 verses. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, because he has dealt bountifully with me. Let me pray for us. How long, O Lord? As we walk through challenges, how long shall we sit in that, O God? We feel sometimes like we are forgotten, like we're forsaken, like we've been abandoned in that thing, and yet you in your word tell us that's not the case at all. That you never leave us or forsake us. that you are with us even as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that when we're afraid, we can trust in you. There's so many promises in your word that comfort us when we go through those times of waiting, God. And we trust that you're going to work good, because that's another promise that you make to us. God, we give to you the waiting season that we're in, the waiting season that we were in the past, the waiting season that we may be in the future. God, do with the waiting what only you can do to help us to trust in you more, to grow us into the people that you want us to be more, and to accomplish your will, which is always that more people would know and love you as your love is lived out in our lives and in the lives of Christians everywhere. We trust in you, O God, for our salvation. We trust in your steadfast love. Help us to trust it even more today and in the future. We pray this in Jesus' name, and all God's people said, amen.